Chapter 16, Section 2 continued. We need to now talk about the poor class. We've talked about the nouveau riche, we've talked about the middle class, we now need to talk about the poor class. The poor lived worlds away from the middle class and obviously the nouveau riche. They were obviously poor due to their low wages, but the reason that wages were so low was there were so many workers that needed jobs, and employers could offer low wages and still get their jobs filled. Because they had these low wages, they obviously had bad living conditions. There was a shortage of housing, rent was always rising, and you had some people that actually had to rent out part of their home or apartment to boarders, so that way they could afford to have somewhere to live as well. In the cities, you're going to see tenements. Tenements were these poorly built apartment buildings. It's estimated that by the year 1900 in New York City, half of the city's poor, like 1.5 million people, lived in tenements. And they were clustered together in these poor neighborhoods near work. They were dark, they were airless. Sometimes you'd have 12 families per floor. Outside of the tenements, you'd have raw sewage, garbage piling up. And because they were near work, a lot of times they're next to the factories. So pollution, the air quality, was a problem. So sickness and death were not uncommon. If you were African American, you faced the worst of the bad conditions. Widespread discrimination, you had the lowest of the low-paying jobs, you had the worst rent for the worst apartment, harassment from city officials, police. But for African Americans, it was still better than living in the South. And at this time period, if you were this poor, there were few, if any, government programs to help you out. And some people wanted more done. And you're going to see the development of settlement houses. Settlement houses were these community service centers where you could go and get educational opportunities to help you better yourself, skills training. They would host cultural events. One of the huge people that worked with settlement houses was a lady by the name of Jane Addams. Jane Addams, here's the thing, she was born into money. She was born wealthy. 1860 she was born, but she's going to dedicate her life to helping out the urban poor. She's going to begin her settlement work in 1889 in Chicago at Hull House. And they did what most settlement houses did. They provided educational opportunities to the poor, cultural opportunities, trying to find ways to help the poor improve their living conditions. It was staffed usually by volunteers, mostly college-aged young women. They would provide nursery and kindergarten for working moms. And a lot of these volunteers at the settlement houses, they went on to help with later reform movements as well. Jane Addams promoted other causes as well. One of the big causes she promoted was women's suffrage, women getting the right to vote. She was also president of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. For her work, she wins the Nobel Peace Prize in 1931. And it is a few years later in 1935 that she dies at the age of 75. Janie Porter Barrett is going to found the first African American settlement house in 1890. It was in New York City. It was called the Locust Street Social Settlement. And around the same time as settlement houses, you're going to get a different idea called the social gospel coming about. The social gospel is going to use Christian principles to address social problems. And there were two Protestant ministers that were big in this movement, Washington Gladden and Caroline Bartlett. And they opened their churches not just on Sunday or Wednesday. They opened their church doors 7 days a week. And they would offer free public kindergarten, a gym, home skills, work skills, meal programs, other creative activities for the city's poor.